Next, Syria's security forces have killed over 1,000 civilians in the current wave of violence in the country. This comes just 3 months after the fall of the authoritarian regime of Bashar al-Assad. Interim President Ahmed al-Sharaa is promising an inquiry. His forces have now declared a halt to an operation against Assad loyalists in the west of Syria, in which the Alawite community was targeted.
Crowds gathered on Sunday in Damascus with placards that read "Stop the killing," after the country saw its worst violence since 13 years of civil war ended in December.
What we are calling for today is peace and stability in Syria, and also to stop any military escalation that might lead to deaths in the ranks of the security forces or the innocent civilians who are killed at the hands of undisciplined groups.
After a group of Assad loyalists ambushed a Syrian security forces patrol last Thursday in Jabal al-Latakia, Damascus sent backup to the region and launched a crackdown on so-called remnants of the Assad regime in the Latakia and Tartus regions. Militias loyal to the government appear to have joined the crackdown, which spiralled into an indiscriminate campaign of violence, killing mostly civilians from the Alawite minority. President al-Sharaa has promised justice, even for those, quote, closest to him.
We affirm that we will hold accountable, firmly and without leniency, anyone who's involved in the bloodshed of civilians, who overstep the powers of the state or who exploits their authority. No one will be above the law, and anyone whose hands are stained with the blood of Syrians will face justice sooner rather than later.
Calling the attacks on civilians and mistreatment of prisoners isolated incidents, al-Sharaa established a committee to investigate them. The Defence Ministry also announced on Monday they would be fully cooperating with the inquiry and that the operation against, quote, remnants of the Assad regime was over, an operation they qualified as successful. A United Nations delegation were in the region on Monday to investigate independently. These massacres come as Islamist rule in Damascus struggles to consolidate power in a country fragmented by ethnic and sectarian divides.
Syria reaching a deal now to integrate the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, with state institutions. This comes from the Syrian presidency, Ahmed al-Sharaa, who we saw in that report, holding that position since the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad. Let's get more analysis, and welcome to the programme Matt Broomfield from the Rojava Information Centre, which provides independent information and analysis on Syria. Matt, thanks for being with us. Violence to such an extent raises clear questions about safety and security in Syria. What can you tell us?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the timing of this deal between the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces and the HTS-led interim government in Damascus coming hot on the heels of that awful slaughter that we saw over the weekend in the Alawite regions on the coast really highlights, on the one hand, the urgent need for Syrian communities to work together and to reach a deal, to reach a modus vivendi, which means there'll be no more fighting, but it also underscores the grave challenges that are faced by all Syrians, perhaps particularly those minority communities, the Alawites, the Druze, the Kurds, the Christians, the Yazidis, but faced by all Syrians as they seek to put those 13 years of bloodshed behind them and move forward to peace.
What is the role played by the current leadership in this situation? Has it lost control, or is it actually sanctioning what is going on? Can you give us some insight on that?
I mean, the current leadership has never had control of a majority, really, of the country's territory. They were able to dislodge the dictator Bashar al-Assad in that blitzkrieg offensive in November. But the bloodshed continued from there on. At that time, the fighting was particularly concentrated in the Kurdish regions in the northeast, where Turkish-backed militias were taking opportunity of the chaos to launch their own deadly violence, killing hundreds of primarily Kurdish civilians. They were never able to take control of larger sections in the country's southeast due to the extension of Israeli occupation into the country. And there are, of course, those pockets on the coast, former Assad strongholds and in even ISIS cells in the west of the country. So, the administration, certainly, I think in many ways is looking for a peaceful resolution, or, al-Sharaa himself, is prepared for that. But, he has risen to power, as the leader of a militant Islamist organization. That doesn't change, overnight or with a few nice speeches. And, he will be keenly aware, as the international community is keenly aware, that the pressures ahead in integrating, particularly those Islamist factions, including the Turkish-backed factions who are at the forefront of the bloodshed in the coastal regions, into any new Syrian settlement.
So the Alawites then becoming basically scapegoats because of their links to Assad?
Yes, that's right. I mean, the situation on the coast, there certainly has been the involvement there, of actors close, formerly close to Bashar al-Assad, potentially some degree also of Iranian involvement, Iran, of course, being a former close ally of Assad. At the same time, the scale of the bloodshed, the targeting of civilians, the awful scenes of people being paraded through the street like dogs, being shot dead, it demonstrates that, this is sectarian violence. And I think it underscores once again what the Kurdish-led administration in the northeast have been saying, that the only solution that's workable for Syria is a federal decentralized system with respect for all minorities and for all communities. And that's the only way forward which can bring an end to the bloodshed. But it seems very difficult to reach at this moment in time, despite the recent agreement between the Kurds and Assad.
So Matt, when Ahmed al-Sharaa talks about what happened in the West there as isolated incidents, is he being disingenuous, or does he genuinely think it is an isolated incident that's happened there?
I mean, this is certainly the most extreme sort of single instance of violence that we've seen since the fall of the Assad regime, but the warning signs have been there. There are many forces who are outside of sort of the direct control of al-Sharaa and his circle. Al-Sharaa, as has been noted many times, may himself, be a pragmatist, may indeed be willing to put behind the sort of sectarian violence which has paved his path to the throne of Syria. That does seem to be the messaging from him as an individual, but ultimately, we're not speaking here about an individual. We're speaking about communities. We're speaking about armed groups who have spent 13 years pitted against one another in the Syrian theatre of war. And so, it would be naive to think that that can be changed just by putting on a tie and shaking hands with the United Nations. And I think it's to be hoped that this violence will kind of underscore to the world the need to continue working, yes, with al-Sharaa, to continue building on the goodwill that all Syrians feel to some degree following the fall of Assad, but also to keep holding those new authorities to account in these crucial years ahead.
It is a very delicate time indeed. Matt Broomfield, thank you very much indeed. Joining us there from London, Matt of Rojava Information Centre, which provides independent news and analysis on Syria. Matt, thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. We appreciate your time.